Perfect Days is a beautiful slice of life movie by Wim Wenders, which explores the beauty and tragedy of a minimalist existence. First and foremost, a shout out to Chris Stuckman, who has a great YouTube channel where he breaks down all types of movies. This was on his top 10 list of movies for 2024, and it piqued my interest, so I checked it out and definitely appreciated it. Also, shout out to Chris for that phraseology of slice of life movie. I had never heard that term before. As soon as he said it, I knew exactly what it meant and instantly applied it to a bunch of movies and shows and stuff like that I've seen. So think of movies that are, I wouldn't say plotless, but that not much is going on. Like there's not a firm beginning and end and climax, but picture like a person's life, full life, and you get to see a slice of that life. A random point within their lifetime is the beginning, and then it ends at a certain point. And you have a lot of unanswered questions. That's a slice of life style movie, which this one is. And it resonated with me as a writer and from a writing perspective because it inspired to reflect on routine and consistency and just different ways of storytelling in general. In my little recap and review here, I'm going to speak about different themes in the film, characterization, symbolism, narrative devices used, and as always, some practical writing lessons and advice for my fellow writers out there. But first, as we like to do here on the Spun Today Podcast, let's shout out the writers. Perfect Days was written and directed by Wim Wenders, with an additional writing credit to Takuma Takasaki. Shout out to the writers that put this film together. Here is the official synopsis. Hirayama cleans public toilets in Tokyo, lives his life in simplicity and daily tranquility. Some encounters also lead him to reflect on himself. So in the movie, it follows the life of our main character, Hirayama, played by Koji Yakusho, who is a janitor that cleans public toilets in Tokyo in Japan. We follow him throughout his day, and then the next day, and then the next, in a way that allows us to see a few things. He's not a person of many means. He seems to find joy and happiness in simple things, whether it be photographing trees or reading a good book. He's very methodical and repetitive in what he does. From the moment he wakes up, he folds his cot a very specific way, wakes up at the exact same time, drinks the same iced coffee beverage from the same vending machine every single day before going to work, and takes immense pride in what he does. What's interesting about the narrative device of this slice of life approach is that it's really observational in style. There's not a lot of dialogue going on, not a lot of speaking, and it emphasizes small, everyday, mundane moments as opposed to dramatic plot lines and plot points. And a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there is that this style of storytelling can help create the intimacy that you feel when watching this film by focusing on these seemingly minor details that kind of reveal deeper truths about the characters that we're following. One of the themes that we see in this film is the main character living on his own terms. He lives this modest life as a janitor, and we see this deep personal choice to live simply, to have a very minimalistic existence. And a key takeaway for my fellow writers out there, something I definitely took away from this, is just thinking about how characters' choices, however unconventional they may be, help define their identity and communicate backstory for those characters. Because as the viewer, I felt like I knew a lot about him without knowing anything besides just following his routine on a day-to-day basis, which made me think of another theme that we see throughout the film, which is routine and the beauty that you can find in that. And it reminded me of this Japanese concept of shokunin, which I believe I first heard or learned what that was in the documentary Jiro Dreams of Sushi, which is a great doc if you haven't seen it. but it's a concept essentially of pursuing perfection through repetition. There's an interesting duality there between the beauty of mastery that comes with repetition versus the monotony of routine, which comes with repetition. And I really appreciated his almost stoic existence. But on the other hand, I also couldn't help but feel sadness for how isolated and alone he seemed. And a key takeaway from my fellow writers out there is that there's an interesting way to embody philosophical ideas like Stoicism, for example, within characters to help explore the tension within those ideas. Now, switch gears to the characterization of our main protagonist here. He had this very modest, outward-facing life, but his inner world seemed to be the complete opposite of that. He has tons of books, and he would routinely go to the library or a bookstore and take out these books that he would read every single night, again, in the same exact way, the same exact routine. But it's books on like highbrow poetry and deep philosophical books about life that you wouldn't necessarily expect a janitor to be into. And he has this eclectic taste in music and has a ton of cassettes. That's what he listens to his music on. And VHS tapes as well. So he seems to like technologically be locked in the past somehow with books and cassette tapes for music, chess tapes for visual, versus his professional life where, you know, he uses his own gadgets and tools and different solutions to do his work of cleaning bathrooms. And that all adds to the depth of the character and makes him multidimensional. And that's a key takeaway from my fellow writers out there, to add complexity to your characters by giving them passions or hobbies that you wouldn't expect to go with them. So one thing that does happen that disrupts his life as it normally goes is that his niece shows up at his doorstep, and he hasn't seen her in a while, seemingly, because he's like, oh my God, you've grown so much. And she essentially ran away from home, you know, beefing with her mom, some like teenage angst type of thing going on. And she winds up spending a couple days with him and going to work with him. And they have like a nice, loving relationship. But you clearly know that they're estranged, or at least he is, from her mother, which is his sister. A couple days later, the mom shows up to pick her up, and you can tell that the mom is very well off financially. She has a driver, they're coming in this fancy car, she's like well dressed, and we get a touch of insight into his backstory that could inform why he is the way he is, why he's living the life the way he's living it. And apparently there's some sort of unresolved conflict with his father. And the sister tells him, you know, he's not like before, you know, he's very, very ill now. You should go see him. And, you know, he denies to do so. But we don't get much more than that in terms of resolution with what happened between them, what's the issue. And it was interesting to me from a writing perspective that you can use relationships to add unresolved tension to a character or to the backstory of the character without completely providing the details of it, without the exposition. And just that single interaction between him and his sister, which is the only interaction they have in the movie, a few lines of dialogue helped convey like decades of emotion and trauma that our main character has been dealing with. And then we get kind of a little bit more clarity of why he's such a perfectionist, maybe when it comes to his work. Why some of his colleagues, you know, just do like a random wipe down job, and he is using mirrors and making sure every tiny dot or speck of anything is completely cleaned from every bathroom that he cleans. And it's like the public restrooms themselves are being used metaphorically. He takes pride in taking care of and cleaning these overlooked spaces. Maybe he feels overlooked himself within his life, within whatever issue happened with his pops. And to contrast between the spotless bathrooms versus his messy seeming personal life. That could also be why he is so nostalgic from a technological perspective. He uses cassette tapes for his music, the VHS tapes for video. He has a camera that he uses, and every day at lunch he takes a picture of this tree. And the camera's a film camera. And he goes on weekends when he does his laundry to go develop the film. Then he takes the film, goes home, and in serial killer-ish fashion, like logs the photos in these boxes that he has adds the date on. And he has tons of boxes with like years worth of dates, all of which have pictures of the same tree that he takes a picture of every day at work when he takes his lunch break. But it kind of shows him being like anchored to that time period of, cassette tapes, VHSs, etc. And how he may have something unresolved there in the past, or some sort of attachment to the past that he doesn't want to let go of. His routine is definitely symbolic of discipline, but also of obsession or of isolation. From a writing perspective, we may be able to show that same type of thing by repetition of prose, by repeating dialogue and reinforcing that same type of routine that we see visually in this film, but on paper. And this is the type of story that kind of holds a mirror to the audience. It makes us as the viewers reflect on our own lives, on our own routines, on our own values, which is definitely a creative way to foster engagement from your audience. You could definitely take parts of his life and how dedicated he is with his work, as like the symbolism behind his work is how he expresses himself personally, how he exhibits his pride in what he does. It adds definitely that symbolic or thematic weight to an otherwise everyday task. And last but certainly not least, another great takeaway for my fellow writers out there, which I didn't think I would personally like if I thought of it objectively prior to seeing this film, but it's just the open-ended backstory. Like, after watching the film, you still don't know exactly what happened with his dad, what's the dynamic with the sister, and that somehow gave like a depth to the character without having to explain it. And from a writing perspective, we can attempt that in purposely leaving gaps within our character's history so that the audience can fill it. And in doing so, making them more intriguing and relatable to each individual audience member, because they're going to fill it with their own thoughts and biases. And I thought that was done interestingly. And that, folks, was my little recap and review of the film Perfect Days, which came out in 2023.